Is it time for a breakup or a breakthrough?
When you come to that point, okay, break up or break through, all you can do is your part.
The more that we can focus on our side of the street, the less we're going to be super reliant on our partner to fill our childhood wounds. From To Be Magnetic, this is the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacy Phillips.
And your host, Jessica Gill.
As the leading destination for neural manifestation, we dispel the woo-woo in order to help you create real, tangible results based on neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, and energetics. Our goal is to normalize the practice of manifestation and empower you to get into the driver's seat of your life in order to manifest the experiences, relationships, and things that most align with your authenticity. And by pressing play, the process begins.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Expanded. Jessica here. So today we're continuing diving into relational aspects. And I say relational aspects because when it comes to relationships, it's not just the romantic ones that people tend to think of. It is the ones that we have with our friends. It's the ones that we have with our coworkers. It's the ones that we have with our family. Our relationships are sort of the foundation that's going to help craft our life. And so today we have a question that we get asked so many times. How do I know whether it's time to have a breakthrough with this relationship in my life or have a breakup? How do I have an ending to a romantic relationship, a friend relationship? What sort of communication do I need to do through the lens of manifestation? How does that impact my manifestation? Should I be learning the lessons in the dynamic, or should I really set that boundary and take space and move on? So today, Lacy and Janelle and I are going to dive into that topic and really give you that roadmap for when you are at that point in your life and some of your relationships aren't feeling good. This is going to be your episode to turn to. If you know anyone who is going through this or recently just went through a breakthrough or a breakup in their relationship, send it to them. It'll be the validation that they need, that they made the best decision to care for them. And we have some really exciting news for our TBM community. We will be kicking off our summer challenge on May 20th. This year's challenge is going to be all about getting to the root and really overhauling our biggest block. How can we get out of our own way? How can we honor our inner child? How can we connect with our authenticity and reinforce a new way of being? And if you felt stuck in the patterns and the limiting beliefs and the same tests and triggers, or even just that emotional wave hitting you again and again, this challenge is going to be for you. There's so much more to talk on it. It's going to be a 5-week challenge. Really excited for it. But on May 18th, so mark your calendars, we're going to kick off the challenge season with a TBM community walk. We love to do these walks. They're free events where we just invite everyone to sort of meet up, connect with other people in the community. If you've been listening to the podcast for a while and you're not a part of the community, but you want to meet other people who are like-minded, come to one of the walks, get to know people, socialize, meet an accountability buddy. It is honestly the best time. So if you were in LA or West Coast base, we're going to be hosting it at Hermosa Beach. This is a really fun, incredible spot that I've spent a lot of time over the years, and we're going to walk up and down their boardwalk there. And we invite this out for TBMers all over the world. There'll be a link in the show notes where you can sign up and host a walk in your city. So mark your calendars, May 18th. We're kicking off the walk. Sign up to host one, or just go on the site, check out the map, see where a local one is in your area, connect with like-minded TBMers and fellow Expanded podcast listeners. It is seriously the best time. Again, totally free event. Host them in your city. We're so excited to see you guys. Let's all step into this summer with intention and community.
And now, a word from our partners.
If you have not heard of Arma colostrum, let me tell you why it has quickly become my absolute favorite superfood that I've been taking on a daily basis. Armra is an unrivaled nutrient powerhouse. It has 400 plus pure bioactives that are natural molecules that promote healthy functions throughout the body. They include a host of protective antibodies, prebiotic compounds, strengthening peptides, amino acids, trace minerals, immunoglobulins, tissue growth factors, antioxidants, and other natural immune factors that work synergistically to enhance your health. This superfood is actually the first piece of nutrients that we receive, that all mammals receive from their mothers within 48 to 72 hours after giving birth. It is that nutrient-dense supplement to really help our bodies thrive, function, and grow to the best of our abilities. There are 5,000 plus studies on this stuff that really show at any age, taking and ingesting colostrum can help our bodies function on the highest level. Now, I started taking this over the summer and pretty much noticed results immediately. Bloating went down, digestion got better, and my immunity seemed to be a lot stronger. I would come across people with colds or sicknesses thinking I'd be coming down with it in a few days, and it seemed to have really supported my innate immune system. It is completely sustainably sourced from a family-owned dairy farm. They only use the surplus of colostrum, and they're able to remove any unnecessary compounds from the colostrum, like casein and fat, which is part of the reason that some dairy can be inflammatory to some people. I'm someone that's very sensitive to dairy, and anytime I have real dairy, I always wind up taking a lactate, but using colostrum, I've never had any issue with it at all. And in fact, it seems to protect me just as well as the dairy pill against some of the dairy that I eat. And part of the reason that that is happening and why I feel like it's been so effective is because it's helping to rebuild your barriers. We talk about having a really strong barrier protection in the lining of our mouth, our sinuses, our lungs, our gut. Our barriers house 80% of our immune system. It's the first line of defense against everything that we inhale and ingest from the outside world. So when you take Armra close to eating, inflammatory foods or being in an atmosphere where the air quality isn't as optimal, your barriers are tightening to help protect you from everything else going on. So this is one of my absolute favorite superfood products out there on the market. I think it is fantastic. I really see results from it. Feel free to ask me questions if you're curious about it. And we have a discount code for you guys. You can use the code TBM for 15% your first order. Again, that is code TBM for 15% off. And if you're interested, you can get the subscription. That way you won't ever run out and you can always have that immune support.
All right, on to the episode.
Today we have kind of a fun topic. This is a question we get asked a lot, is like, how do I know in my romantic relationships, in my friendships, in any sort of relationship I have out there, is it time for a breakup or a breakthrough? How do we know if it's our wounding that's coming up that we need to heal, or is it really time that this just isn't aligned? We should not settle and we should move into our separate directions. I wanted to kind of jump in first of like how to understand what our close relationships signify to us and how they can help us in the manifestation process. So having boundaries, makes you more magnetic. How does consciously looking at all of our relationships in our life and how we're interacting with them help us in manifestation?
I'll start with it. I think that relational reflections are the best teachers in manifestation possible. Aside from triggers and growth opportunities, I think that being in relationship with anyone, family, friends, intimate relationships, they're just your greatest, quickest mirrors to practice all of this work on. So I think the universe uses them in an effort to mirror back to you the thing we always talk about. The universe's only intention is to get you back into your whole, worthy, authentic self, peeling away the layers of programming. And when you're in isolation and alone, you aren't having the opportunity to rub up against a lot of your childhood programming as much. Sure, you are sort of in the world or at work and stuff, but not when you have to really have these conversations and boundaries and the triggers that I think about in intimate relationships of jealousy. I mean, all the abandonment, all the things that can come up that can really super speed your process. So I think having these relationships in your life are the greatest gift. I'm excited to get into this topic because I know it's a confusing one for people. I feel like I have some clear, points that when I worked with clients that I would really use for them to be able to sift through whether it's time to break up or break through. But what about you, Janelle? What do you think when it comes to, just from a therapeutic lens, relationships in your life pertaining to manifestation?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's such a direct reflection of looking at where we're at, what our patterns are, where our growth opportunities and edges are. Even actually in the fact if we're not in relationship, right? That even kind of reflects a potential pattern there. So all of it, whether we're in or we're not, or whatever the dynamics are, is such a beautiful place to start to then go, what's happening around me and what does this mean, and get curious about it.
I was even thinking too of like high self-worth actions that we might take in regards to each of them. So like setting boundaries from a place of doing the energetic boundaries and working on the subconscious block there, and then setting those verbal boundaries or having boundaries in place for ourselves. That's high self-worth. Honoring your needs in a relationship, being able to not play small or people please or not put yourself first. That's high self-worth. Communicating with authenticity and integrity, if we can really process our emotional state on them and then respond to them from that place of like, okay, my authentic self really craves and desires this in this life. And I feel so confident in going after that for myself that magnetism is going to meet you there.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, so first one, is it a test? This happens for people, especially when they're early dating, but I think about this in friendships. Is this a test dynamic that's presenting, or is this person a test? And so I'll kind of go through the questions there. First, I almost want to put like, what have you been calling in? Does this relationship directly relate to something that you are manifesting, a self-worth issue that relates to what you're manifesting? And if it doesn't, does it mirror something that you're shifting? We just had the mirror episode. Our relationship dynamics are going to mirror to us where we're needing to heal. So if our pattern in the past was the second we were faced with this struggling dynamic, we cut them off and push them away, maybe this is an invitation to try something different. What is the opposite? You always say opposite is the medicine, Lacy. So it's really looking at that and then kind of understand, where have we been repeating dynamics, looking at that pattern? How can we see this test and the lesson that's really beneath it? And then you can do the test checklist. Does it impede on a boundary you set for yourself? Do you feel shame or embarrassment around it? Does it make you settle or feel small? Is it pressing on insecurity, core wound, or shadow you need to work through? When you guys have had situations where you've been at a sticking point in any sort of relationship, or have seen clients where you're like, okay, this doesn't feel good anymore. What do you feel like is the next step to move forward, of whether you cut them out, ghost them, set a boundary, or dig into your DIs and consciously communicate that you want to try something different?
Yeah, I would say if I were creating somewhat of a checklist on this topic for any relationship in your life, the first thing I would ask myself is this person growing with me? So intimate relationship, friendship, family, is this person growing with me and supporting my growth? That's the very first thing I would ask myself. The second thing I would ask is this person an expander for me in any way? Are there elements of how they're expanding me? And then the third thing that I would say that's really important pertaining to manifestation, is this person a narcissist and taking up the space of what my manifestation could be, where it could be landing? You see that a lot in sidekick relationships. So the person who can't manifest the partner, but they have this narcissistic friend that they're everything for this friend. And that person's completely blocking them from love and money. So those would be my 3 key points to really assess this person's health in my life. And of course, like the obvious ones that I think Janelle should get into more, are they abusive? Are they, gaslighting you? All that kind of stuff. That I'm talking about, just like evergreen stuff over here that's manifestation energetics. And then if you are getting like a no on all of those 3 things in the checklist, my most important piece when I was working with people, and I've said on the podcast probably multiple times, is do the work while you're in the relationship, not if it's abusive and problematic for mental health, but if it's a romantic relationship, if it's a boss dynamic, if it's a friendship, do your subconscious piece of the work while you're in the tension, because it's where the stakes are the highest. You won't be the laziest. If you are avoidant and cut them out, you probably never will. And then of course you're going to attract a similar version of that dynamic again. So that is my one piece. If it's not a harmful or abusive situation, do the work in it, set the boundaries while you're in it. And if they can't meet you after the shadow phase, you have your answer. If they're impeding on your growth and they're not growing with you and they're not willing to go the extra mile with you, you have your answer. So those are my initial thoughts.
I'm so glad you're naming that, because my first thought, even with this conversation, was like, oh, this is just not a one size fits all conversation. And my thought too is just to listen to this conversation with that in mind, that it's not a one size fits all conversation. There's so much nuance. There's so many layers to all of these things, right? I kind of want to speak to more healthier dynamics first. The concept of boundaries in relationship. Well, some people can show up with more of rigid boundaries. So the second they see something, they're just like, I'm out, peace out, and they run for the hills, right? I don't want to settle. But really, their boundaries are really rigid, and it's really not, that's actually blocking them. Like, to me, in my opinion and manifestation, that's actually blocking them, because they're just so quick to throw someone out in 2 seconds. On the other side of the spectrum, we have some people that are really porous in their boundary. And this is the person that it's beautiful to have empathy, but they don't have the self-empathy as well. And so they can be more doormat. But they're making excuses. Well, I understand because they have this and this and this and this and this. But because they don't have the self boundaries, that porous boundaries are really hurting them, right? So there's this middle ground of more flexible boundaries. And again, every situation is so different. The whole thing is very nuanced. But that's something to look at. In general, as a pattern, do I kind of run more rigid or do I run more porous? How do I have empathy for self and empathy for other? And then how do I navigate that dynamic out of that space? Another way to look at it is sometimes, like, this is like more anxious avoidant attachment. Some people have a deep fear of engulfment and they just run. And then other people's do the engulfing because they're just dysregulated and they're anxious. So to look at where do I land, on that spectrum as well. So really, like, the question is, what's my overall pattern in relationship? And how do I look at, from a manifestation lens, where did I pick up this pattern? How am I showing up? And where's my growth edge in this? And then, with the narcissistic dynamics, there's multiple types of narcissism. And the most common one, I think the go-to that everybody thinks of, is the grandiose narcissist. But honestly, I think actually the more dangerous type of narcissist is the one that's covert. That's the one that are deep victim mentality, deep victim mentality. And they have all the same qualities of a narcissist, but they appear very kind of gentle, where you want to go. And so somebody that's very empathetic wants to go and then wants to rescue and they want to fix them. And then they get very, very burned in the process. So again, that's a conversation that's really nuanced too, because I think majority of people think of it as the grandiose. And again, I think there's 4 to 6 different types of what narcissists can look like. But at the end of the day, I think what we're naming in this conversation, the breakup or breakthrough, is almost like a conversation about confrontation. It's more about, okay, something stepped on my boundary here, whether it's a healthy person or unhealthy person. What's my part? Am I a runner? Am I too rigid? Or is this something where this is a healthy enough dynamic where I need to confront and I need to show up and I need to address something? And in that, again, there's so much more nuance and layers of how and when and blah, 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 and nonviolent communication and skills on communicating. And to me, confrontation is honestly, it's an art form. It's an art form that all of us, I think, need to get really good at. It's a skill that we all have to learn that benefits every relationship we have. And so guess what I want to name is that we only can control our side of the street. When you come to that point where, okay, break up or break through, all you can do is your part. which is, hey, this is what I'm experiencing. This is how this is feeling. This is what I need. All of that. You communicate your boundary. And then what's so hard is that we can't control how the other person shows up. We can't control if that other person, narcissist or not, is going to take ownership for their behavior, have any empathy towards you, change. And so to me, that's where the crossroad hits of relationships can't exist without repair. And in order to have repair, both parties have to be able to own their bad. And so that to me is the kind of the crux of where a breakup can happen or a breakthrough can happen. Because when we're met and the person goes, oh my God, yeah, I do that. I have a pattern of doing that. And I'm so sorry it's impacted you. And this is my, yep. And I own that. And I'd love to change. And I need to get support around that. I'm going to look at that. It is so healing. And that's where the breakthrough happens, where we can go to next levels of intimacy with our partners, our friends, or anywhere else. And the connection just deepens.
I love everything you said in there, Janelle. I think that's so powerful. I think it's really hard when one person is doing the self-work and is learning so much about themselves and growing at such a rapid pace. And that's why I love what you said, Lacy, about like that shadow phase, because we don't always grow at the same rate, at the same time with our partners. Even if you have a partner that is doing their own sort of work too, you're both kind of growing like this at different times. And one of the questions we get asked a lot is people that are in marriages or partnerships, they've been in there for 10, 20 years, and they start doing this work and they realize who their authentic self is. And they're like, holy shit, if I wrote my partnership list today, it wouldn't be my partner. Does that mean I need to break up with them? And I think that's where that almost moment of pause, and you don't have to make it black or white. You can allow the opportunity for the other person to grow too. Even though you just went in and did all this growth work, now you can let them consciously communicate to them what your needs are, what you're hoping for, what you want out of the relationship. How do you guys see that sort of shift when one person's growing, the other isn't, or vice versa?
It's so interesting because I think of my own like intimate relationship with Max, and we're always growing at very different rates, even though he's so open to try anything and supportive of growth. We both can see each other's blind spots. But there's this piece of me, and I say this, I guess, as expansion, that has done so much work of this work that people are doing on themselves, so much unblocking. We have great boundaries, right? Like our finances are completely separate, aside from owning 2 homes together and having a tiny checking account that we both fill for those homes. Because I know that we have very different relationships with money and responsibility with money. So I don't even bring that into our relationship. We have really good structure and boundaries. We're not married. We're not married because we're both showing up because we want to. We may one day, but it's not our priority. We're builders. We like to build things together. So we really know how to create that safe structure in our relationship that's really aligned. That there's this piece of me, again, having done so much work, where even yesterday he has like a lot of recurring patterns. There's this person who helps us, this contractor, on multiple projects that we do, and we really rely on him. And he got so mad at Max over something, like a payment or whatever, is ghosting him, dodging his calls, probably won't work with us again. Max doesn't know how to multitask and juggle stuff and have good communication with those. And I could look at the situation and go, oh, there's another Max thing. You know what I mean? I guess to summarize this, there's a lot of space for him to just be in his process because we have these really healthy structures. And I've done so much of my side of the street. And in a way, through sobriety, he's done so much of his side of the street that we can allow each other to have these imperfections and this journey while still being so supportive of one another and not gaslighting each other and not throwing it in each other's face. But This again comes from two people who are really in process of manifesting their ultimate goals and dreams and following their desires. Because if I were to look at us and we were in a relationship where, say, the finances were so strained and we were in a marriage and things were so complicated, we didn't have these healthy structures, it would be an extremely tense, questioning situation. But we're two people who really built these independent lives that really sustain us and fill us and have come together to be partners that can unpartner at any point. Strings attached, of course, we have kids now, but it's not like most people, so there's more to digest there and stuff. But from a manifestation perspective, the more that we can focus on our side of the street, follow our dreams, listening to that initial checklist, that I was saying, and all of the wisdom we're saying here, the less we're going to be super reliant on our partner to fill our childhood wounds. Like, if we're just getting down to it, like that's kind of my perspective. I think that's a really healthy approach to all friendships, all family dynamics, all intimate relationships. And I even think about my relationship with my parents. I was actually with Krista and Jenna having lunch on Monday, and we both had this epiphany where I expect nothing from my parents. Nothing. I've done so much inner child work that there's not one thing I expect from them. I don't expect them to say a certain thing, to heal a certain thing, to provide anything. I don't expect one thing from them. Therefore, we have phenomenal relationships. This isn't to say living a life on an island at all, because other people fill the needs of things I expect. So it's not that. The more we can address our inner child, the more we can integrate, the more that we can peel those layers, the more relationships are going to show up in our lives where there's just not a lot of looking to others to fill our childhood needs.
You know what, Lacy, this is my own just sense and reflection. So there's the honeymoon, falling in love phase. We're full of oxytocin. We're completely blind to what is happening, right? And it gets us in relationship. And then after commitment is made, it doesn't mean you have to be married or not, but after a deeper commitment is made, couples go through what's called the power struggle phase. It's a really fun phase. That's where all of this stuff comes off. And it can be so painful and disorienting because you're like, you were going to meet all of my perfect needs perfectly. And it honestly comes with some grief of, okay, there's some real things here. There's some real differences here. And then after you go through, some people don't survive the power struggle phase. And after the power struggle phase, people land what's called integrated love, real love phase. Or you could enter what's called the dead zone, where it's just you're dead, but you're together and there's no closeness. When you were sharing your story with you and Max, Lacy, I was like, oh, you guys are into integrated love. And they're no longer in a power struggle. You know it's yours emotionally, physically, literally, all of that. And there's a real sweetness in that phase. So I want to name that too, that is a process of to getting to where Lacy and Max are.
There is. And Jessica, when you were asking that question, similar sort of what you were touching on, Janelle, in my mind, I was thinking energetically, you shouldn't even see that shit coming up yet, right? Like they're a test if it is, right? But they're going to hide that stuff. Like Max seemed so together when I met him. So it's like that stuff doesn't usually probably really show up until the power struggle phase, if we're talking about intimate relationships. And it's not obvious to everybody when things are a test in early dating, clearly, because, it's a process to get there, but they won't really be showing you that stuff. And if they are, they're a red flag. It's thank you. Yeah. You can see that they're a test. So pertaining to that specific early dating stuff, Max was so funny when we were early dating that he had, even though he was successful and comes from abundance, he drove this Prius that was so beat up. He picked me up in an Uber for our first date because they're going to hide that shit, right?
Yeah.
I wonder too, if they hide that a little bit as well, It almost kind of signals that that is something that they want to work on, or they're aware like, ooh, maybe this isn't my best self to put forward. So it is an indication that it is something that they're looking at, working on in their own process of working through, versus if they're like, yep, this is just who I am. If this is just who I am doesn't align with me, then that's a red flag.
Yeah. And another thing, this is moving into such a dating topic at this point, but when somebody meets somebody else who is their manifestation and is this higher elevated thing they've been calling in, they start to elevate very quickly because they're so inspired. You know, it's not like these dating experiences they've had in the past. They're like, holy shit, this is my person. I want to step up. That's the energy of that type of dynamic. When you or somebody else you've been looking for meets you and you're their list, they are like, oh, you're inspiring me to get my shit together in whatever capacity, maybe spiritually, consciously, physically, financially, like whatever. That's a really good indication that it's someone to keep pursuing. They're really stepping up.
I am so excited to share with you guys our latest podcast partners, Anima Mundi Herbals. Their founder, Adriana, is a rainforest herbalist, medicine maker, and educator. And she was born in Costa Rica, extensively studied the healing traditions alongside master herbalists and shamans for 13 plus years. She started this company as a means to bridge the ancient remedies and bring them into the modern world. Even the name Anima Mundi translates into the soul of the world, representing the intelligence of the universe. They are a sustainably sourced, certified organic, wild-crafted apothecary that creates herbal remedies and tinctures for your well-being. They source all of their ingredients from honest farmers, wild crafters, and indigenous people when possible to really alchemize and creating that high vibrational medicine, mind, body, and soul while preserving the ancient forms of indigenous botany. And let me tell you, that really shines through in the quality and effectiveness of their products. I've been trying a plethora of different things from them. This is kind of like the apothecary of my dreams. It's a one-stop shop that has 1,000,001 different products for any ailment or tincture or support in your nervous system, in your body, in your soul, in your spirit. And the quality is just so good. So here are a favorite that we're loving over here at TBM right now. Their Relax Tonic, which is for nervous system support. So this has lemon balm, passion flower, chamomile, ashwagandha, and lavender. It tastes incredible and it supports your nervous system, helps relieve stress and anxiety, helps with restful sleep, adaptogenic. This is like the best thing to take at the end of a workday to say, the day is over, we can now relax. It has been so helpful. I take it after work, sometimes before bed, or even like in the middle of the day. There's no groggy feeling from it at all. It's just a total body nervous system relaxation. So perfect right before you do a DI as well. It really helps drop and calm your body so you can drop into that hypnotic state even deeper. And then the other thing that I'm loving, and Lacy is loving, she's been putting in all of her smoothies, she can't say enough good things about this product, is their rose powder. It is high in antioxidants. It helps support blood purification in your cardiovascular system. It reduces inflammation, especially around your eyes and skin. It helps reduce wrinkles, slow the aging process. And what I love it for is it's a heart opener. It increases the connection between self and others by opening the heart. And this is what I particularly use it for. So on those days where I'm feeling just like a little sharp around the edges, I feel irritated by almost everything, and I'm just in one of those moods, I will take the rose powder and it just calms me down and drops me back into my heart, noticing the beauty around me and able to just kind of see things through a different lens. That's why they say the rose colored glasses, because rose helps you see things and the world through a sense of beauty and connection. They have so many more items on here. I can't wait to see what speaks to you guys, and we have an incredible discount with them. You can use the code TBM25 to receive 25% off your order. That's correct. TBM25 for 25% off. Now, they have some incredibly priced items as well, so this is a huge steal. We are so excited to be working with them, so honored to be sharing their products with the world. And I know you guys are going to love it. Please let me know what speaks to you. Check out the link in the show notes where you can find all of the products, or you can go to animamundieherbals.com and then just put in the code TBM25 at checkout. Okay, so I'm going to go into some questions here, and I think this is kind of back to those really difficult breakup or breakthrough we have with family or close friends. So this one person wrote in, how do I have a hard conversation with people who aren't currently on their own healing journey? They say they're open to a healing journey, but they shut me down or gaslight me anytime I point to ways they could heal in the relationship. This person says, currently no contact with my parents because they treat me with criticism and disrespect. As part of the manifestation challenge, I decided to stand in my worth and no longer accept this type of behavior from them, which has been extremely empowering. They tell me that they don't understand why I made this choice of no contact, or asking for specific examples of what they did so they can learn and change. And I reiterate specific examples where they were critical or disrespectful, and then they turn around and gaslight me, tell me I'm being too emotional or dramatic as a result of those situations. So sometimes I even receive countless texts that are argumentative or mean, name calling, when they're the one who opened the door and said they wanted to learn how to get better. I just don't know how to continue with this relationship or to have integrity conversation with them. So what do we do when we're met with extensively an emotional wall, someone who cannot hear us, even if they're saying, I want to learn, I want to change, but their actions are not showing that?
I'm so sorry to whoever going through that. It's so incredibly painful. It's so incredibly disorienting. That is abusive, and the emotional, physical, psychological impacts of that are real. And it's so disorienting to be with someone with psychological, emotional abuse and all of that. So exactly what you said, Jessica, is actions way by far outweighs their words. Oh, I want this, but their actions are completely showing other ways. That is a sign for an immediate boundary. And if you're so deep in it where there's that cognitive dissonance piece where you're just like, but they're good, but they're bad, but this and that, and you're really confused. I think sometimes you could honestly, that's where you need a third party person that's neutral. I've seen this with clients of some form of an abusive parent where the therapy was maybe just 1 or 2 sessions, but it was confirmation of, oh, okay, this is abusive and this isn't working. And oh, I can't do any work with them. This is as far as it goes. And I have a caveat with that too, that there's some narcissists that are so tricky. And if it's not a narcissistic informed therapist, then that can go sideways and there's a number of things with that too. But if you're thinking it's psychological abuse and emotional abuse, check in with people. This is what's happening, just so that you can get that validation to go, okay, I need to pull out. As much as I desperately want to have repair, this person is not capable, even if they're saying they are.
I mean, this person seems like they already had that conversation, but how do you have that conversation when you know that the person probably isn't going to be receptive, and maybe they did want to keep contact, but in a boundaried way too?
You know, when you've gone through real psychological, emotional abuse, it's such a process of untangling, especially with a parent. It's such a deep process of, I mean, sometimes there's so much shame of, oh my gosh, I had to completely walk away from a parent, and they have so much shame about that. And that comes back to the precipice of they're not able to repair, but they're my parent. And what do I do? And there's sometimes in your healing journey where the healing is in how you're showing up for yourself. And there might be a period of time or indefinitely where you go, if it's that toxic, where you go, I can't have a relationship, period, with this person. I can love and have empathy for the trauma they've went to, but they're just too toxic for me to be in relationship, and I can't ever be in contact with them. And that's a real thing. There's other different kind of rates of spectrum of where somebody falls, where it's like, it's not abusive, but it's also not a relationship that can make repair. And in that case, that might be, they might need period of no contact, and they might then get to a point where they're like, okay, my work when my parents come to town is that they stay in a hotel and they don't stay with me. And I make sure that I'm really regulated and grounded before I go in, because the second my nervous system sees their face and hears their voice, I get really dysregulated. So their work is to stay really present with themselves, validate their reality, be with themselves, and really attune to what their boundaries are at that period of time in their own healing is. So sometimes it's not about confronting and all of that. It's more of like validating internally. And sometimes there is a place to go, that doesn't work for whatever the boundary is of whatever they said, that they need to confront gently. So there's a lot of nuance here, but it goes back to honoring yourself and your process of what you need, because most likely the wounding is that you were not seen, you were not attuned to, you were dismissed. And so how do you be in relationship given what the spectrum of that person is and where you're at to then interact with somebody that you are aware of can't own their bad?
Lace, what were you going to say to that from the manifestation lens too?
Well, it kind of like you're saying, Janelle, and I love that you talked about bringing in a third party when it's that deep, and a lot of this really goes back to our boundary workshop. If something isn't as extreme as that example, I can see a lot of people who feel like the aligned action is to leave or set a boundary or whatever, but the piece that's so, so, so important before one does that, again, if it's a safe environment that's not abusive, you've got to do this. You just have to do the subconscious work on yourself first. You have to before you set that boundary, or, you'll be in this position where you're not heard. And there's going to be the shadow phase, usually, no matter what boundary you set. Like, usually people who you're setting boundaries with aren't extremely evolved, and it's going to trigger their stuff, and you're going to have some sort of a shadow reaction from them. And in order to have a nervous system that's strong enough to be compassionate during that time and see where things land on the other side, and see if they impede on that boundary again, you have to address the subconscious work. I mean, I just think that that's so huge. And then the other thing I kind of was curious to ask you about, Janelle, and I'm sure some people are sitting here listening to this who are in the situation of this example or versions of this with friendships and whatnot of this example, and they have had to exit the relationship. Let's give them some tools for the aftermath. Because of course it's hard to walk through that fire and do this, but the aftermath is where like the grief comes up and the guilt comes up and the shame and and you now have that. And of course you're very magnetic for walking through that fire, like jumping off that cliff. But it would be nice to just touch on like some tools when you're on the other side and you're out of it, and the resentment and just all that stuff that's going to follow.
And the tests of that person trying to enter back in, trying to use their tactics to entice you back in. Maybe they're charming now, and then you second guess yourself. I've seen that happen a lot too.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you named that too, because it's like there is so much grief. It's really interesting just that it's friendship breakups. Those are honestly sometimes more painful.
Agreed.
Even partner breakups. I think maybe because we don't anticipate them, or I think we have this expectation, right, that they're going to be forever and all of this. And anyways, so they can be so painful. And I guess I want to name your grief as real. There is a real grieving cycle and all the different phases of grief that, needs to happen. And it can be very painful. There's a book that I want to name for somebody that's really deeply in it. It's called Necessary Endings. And it talks about, really it's all manifestation. I mean, they don't know it, but it's manifestation stuff of, in order for the good to come, the negative has to go. It talks about pruning, and it talks about kind of normalizing necessary endings, because there can be a lot of shame around it too. But yeah, I want to name that part.
Gosh, this would be such a good workshop one day. Is it breakup or breakthrough? Or so it would just be so good for people because it's such a gray space. When I think about this topic in general, the more integrated we become from this work, from just honestly like years of the work, the more that you integrate, the more that these things aren't going to rock your world anymore. And the more that you're not going to address stuff from a reactive place anymore, or care about things from a reactive place anymore. And when I'm saying integrated, again, just getting back to that like whole worthy self where your inner child's not being triggered as much anymore. And you can start to see people much more compassionately. There's nowhere in my life that anybody is sitting that is impeding on my life, like gaslighting me or narcissist. There's nowhere. So it's not this permission to just let these porous energies in at all. But I guess the more that you can just trust the process of integration through this work with third-party help and the years that will go into it, this stuff just doesn't get you as much anymore. It just doesn't ruffle your feathers as much anymore. And so if you're really in it and you're experiencing this right now with someone in your life, that's the one thing I want to say that you have control over is just addressing your inner child over and over, all the feelings that are coming up around it, all of the emotions and stages that are coming up around it. The more that you can use that and work through that, it's going to super speed your integration process. And eventually you're going to get to this place where you're a lot more neutral.
I'm going to put a little summary in the outro of like a protocol that you guys can use using the TBM work stuff. One of the steps too, when you are first discerning, like, okay, is this a breakup or breakthrough? Really recognizing who's in the driver's seat, like using that driver's seat DI to be like, is this my inner child wounding that's coming up? Is this my inner child wounding that's coming up that it needs me to be the higher self and parent and protect myself and set a boundary for? What dynamic is playing out there? And especially when people write in of like, okay, I found my authentic self, I don't know if this partnership's aligned. You don't have to make a decision right now. Take a second to let it unfold. Like witness all the parts of you. Get really clear on what you want. If you never wrote a list for your partner back in the day, what do you want your relationship to look like? Maybe you should start there. What does your new list look like? Or what do you want your new friendships to look like? Maybe you didn't intentionally manifest all of your friends growing up. But the friends that you have now that you want to surround yourself with, what does that list look like? Get really clear so that way you're like, ooh, wait, does that not feel good? Well, why? What are you actually trying to call in? And that's when like discerning, is this a fit? Is it not? It's more clear.
For me, in determining who's going to be in my inner circle, a real deal breaker boundary for me is truly, can this person take ownership? If I say, hey, you stepped on my toes and it hurt my toes, and are they able to take ownership and personal responsibility for themselves? Because if not, there's just no relationship. And then basically I'm going to be falling into codependency to make them feel better. They're not owning it, then it puts me in a seat of codependency, if that makes sense. And so that for me is just like my personal boundary. And then what I'll say, because if somebody finds themselves in a space where they're like, let's say their partner was going through a really hard time. Maybe they were going through some depression or something happened and they're like grumpy and they're irritable and they're being difficult and all of that kind of thing. And you say, hey, this is really hard. It's like, that's interfering on your boundaries, right? It's not just their stuff. It's bleeding over to your space. And you're like, this isn't feel good. To me is like when someone goes, yeah, okay, they say they own, yeah, I have been grumpy and God, I'm going through a really hard time. And that's why. To me, the difference of like, we have empathy, right, for what they're going through. But the difference would be, I am, and I'm going to get some support with it. You gave me this feedback and yes, I own that and I'm going to do something with it. And it might not be overnight. Can you be patient with me? But I'm committed to looking at the ways that I am stepping on your toes because I don't want to step on your toes anymore.
Yeah, it's a beautiful point of entry that you have that, and it's such an evolved point of entry to like require that from your inner circle. People, it'll take them work to get there, but I love as a codependent, it really takes the codependency out of relationship. And I think what you're ultimately saying should be the ultimate goal of everybody for their inner circle, which is a journey, but it should ultimately be the goal.
I want to be able to give grace to people for different seasons of life, that they're not showing up how they want to and not be so rigid there can be really healthy relationship is when both parties can own, and then there can be space for grace when we're not ourselves, we're going through hard times, and we're just not always going to show up perfectly.
By now, you're starting to get the feel for TBM. Maybe you've heard about our workshops and you're interested in manifestation, but you just don't have the time or energy to sit down and do self-help work. We totally get it. In fact, that's why we created the Daily Practice, which is our massive library of self-hypnosis tracks that you can do anytime without having to jump into a workshop. We call these tracks our deep imaginings, or DIs. DIs are different than normal meditations because we designed them using a combination of self-hypnosis techniques, deep theta waves, EMDR-informed tools, and somatic experiencing. A fully loaded formula that is scientifically proven to help you clear your blocks and triggers on a subconscious level, giving you the power to actually create new neural pathways in your brain. So if your boss pisses you off, use our trigger DI. If you want to feel magnetic before a party or an important meeting, use the magnetic self DI. If you're feeling anxious or down on yourself or you need help making a decision, we've got a DI for all of these scenarios and more. You can get full access to the Daily Practice inside the Pathway membership, where you'll also get unlimited access to every workshop, tool, and offering from TBM. The tools in the Pathway membership will support you year-round, whether you're in the worst, a rock bottom, or second worst, a rut, or feeling good and you want to keep the magnetism going. In the Pathway, you'll effectively learn how to become your own manifestation coach, all for less than $1 a day. So even if you're not ready to start a workshop, join the Pathway and start rewriting your neural pathways now to create magnetism. Work through your triggers and get closer to your authentic magnetic self in order to manifest. Use our special code MAGNETIC, all caps, MAGNETIC, to receive $20 off your first TBM purchase. Again, that's all caps, MAGNETIC. Now back to the episode.
Are hard conversations always necessary? Is it okay sometimes to ghost instead? For example, I'm having a lot of tests show up around people complaining to me and taking up a lot of my time and energy to do so. This happened with one person who I hardly know was texting me every day, multiple times a day. This happened with someone I kind of know. They called me long distance and talked at me for 74 minutes. This also happened with a friend who I know very well, but had broken up with me in 2021 and recently just wants to be friends again. All of this was in a span of a week. Is it necessary for me to have a conversation with all of them, or is it okay to just not pick up or receive it and protect my energy that way?
From a manifestation perspective, it's so obvious that you're manifesting something because the universe is sending you all 3 of these in 1 week. These are tests. That's exactly what they are. They're tests. And that's exactly why we created the Boundaries Workshop, because in the Boundaries Workshop, it's going to teach you that you don't have to have a conversation with all of them, and I'll get to why. But you do have to figure out why this pattern's popping up, because they all have a through line that's connected, and the universe is saying, if you can pass these, as well as unblock subconsciously as to why you attract this pattern, the specific pattern, you're going to be so much closer to your manifestation. That's what's happening here. So the Boundaries Workshop is an amazing place to go for this. 2, just really get down to the formula in it, that first you have to do the energetic work to unblock and figure out why this pattern's happening. Or the universe is going to keep testing you with it because it's a pattern you have. And we have a wonderful challenge coming up that's going to address patterns in a beautiful way very soon in May. But that's the first step here. And then from there, you get to decide if you want to have a verbal conversation with them to set a boundary, or if you just want to take aligned action. And so based on the examples that I just heard in all 3 of these, not one of these people are you desiring to have as a core person in your life. So everything Janelle's been talking about, the bar to entry into her inner circle, it doesn't sound like you care if any of these people are in your inner circle too much, right? Like they're calling and talking at you. They're just venting with you. It doesn't sound like there's a give and receive in these relationships. And then you have this potentially narcissistic friend that broke up with you that now wants you back around for comfort again. To me, if I were looking at these as potential suitors in datings, it's a fuck no. Like it's not a hell yes. It's a fuck no to all three of them. If we're just talking manifestation. But I really want to encourage people from this conversation, from this topic, please check out the boundaries workshop. Energetically, it's going to see you through these. And then, of course, if they're heavier situations and there's abuse and there's harmful things going on, that's like Janelle saying, third party, like you really bring in that support if it's deeper. But in my opinion, from a manifestation perspective, it's very clear what's happening here. You called in a manifestation, you're getting close, the universe is testing you, and you have the boundaries, resources, and tools to navigate this accordingly so that this pattern doesn't present itself and you're that much closer to your manifestation.
Oh my gosh. I'm like, oh, I want boundaries for you. I want boundaries for you. I'm like, no one should be talking at you for 74 minutes. No. So yeah. Okay. To answer the ghosting one, I'm like, this is a really, really good question. But honest. Okay. So there's all sorts of nuance, right? There's all sorts of nuance to this. It is not a black and white. Every situation is going to call for something different. I always ask, like, I want to be in my integrity with something. That also doesn't mean I baby someone, right? Me being in my integrity doesn't mean that if somebody's abusive or trying to take advantage of me, that I then make it really cushy for them either. So for example, if there's some guy that you're dating and he just keeps taking and taking and taking, you said, no, 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 no. And then he goes, hey, and it's like, whatever, some booty call text. No, you can ghost him. Mm-hmm. Ghost him. You do not need to respond to that text. But if there's a guy that you, I don't know, went on a date with and he reaches out to go do it again and you ghost him, to me, and there wasn't any conversations, that feels like an opportunity for you to go, oh, this is really uncomfortable to say, I don't want to go out with you again, but I'm going to say, hey, it wasn't a right fit and it was so nice to meet you. And you don't ghost him, right? What's the context of the ghosting? Are you remaining in your integrity?
I love that integrity piece when it comes to responding to people. And I love also the distinction that in the first example you gave where you said, like, yes, you can ghost them. Well, it sounds like the person already set the boundary with them. They already said no. They already were trying to communicate, like, this isn't reciprocal. I don't want to interact. And then the person is not getting the hint. Then it's like, okay, you don't have access to me now because I already told you what the situation was and you're continuing to press past it. But in the other instance, it can be really scary to reject someone, to say, hey, this doesn't feel aligned. There was a great date. You're a nice person. I don't want to hurt your feelings, but it's just not you. That's so scary for a lot of people. So if that's what you're running up against on the fear of hurting someone else, that's where it's like, okay, how can I do this with a place of compassion and empathy and integrity to actually say it, even though it's so scary and I don't want to hurt their feelings?
Yeah, I would totally agree with deciphering between those two things. Even when I was dating, like back with the Max piece, because I'm a codependent, in fact, I made the decision that I would communicate why I wasn't interested in people or why something wasn't working out, because there is fear there. And we know anytime there's fear there and we walk through it, we create situational magnetism. So it was my opportunity during this, like, calling in my partner phase, that I had to step out of my comfort zone. So I love that. But also, again, if it's someone who's completely disrespecting you, like you're saying, booty call, like they could give two shits who you are and that's a ghost. Who cares, you know? But I also love that you're saying, Jessica, working up to that integrity piece, it can take a lot of work and courage, and just giving people the permission that if you're not there yet, it's okay. From simply a manifestation perspective, you don't have to have like the verbal conversation. If you're not having it out of codependency, out of like deep fear, etc., I will tell you the universe is going to present you with more of these opportunities in order to integrate and become your whole worthy magnetic self. It's just that the being ready might come in different stages to where you're actually ready to communicate from also an integrated place, not a reactive, rigid boundary, like, oh, that felt good, I'm going to do this more. It is a journey.
And then one last question here. How do you communicate with ease and grace? So this person said, I'd value any guidance on having the tough conversations around boundary setting, especially with family or other people who assume they should have open access to you. I've done a lot of work around setting boundaries, but I struggle to communicate them. It's important to me to do it in a way that aligns with my authentic code, which includes ease and grace. But I feel so anxious when I think about having these tough conversations. Even though I've already set the boundaries and shifted my behavior, I still haven't clearly communicated them, and it's weighing on me. So that's where it sounds like they're out of like integrity with themselves because they're not saying it. They're kind of being avoidant, but they're like, how do I do it in a easeful way?
Well, what are some of those tools, Janelle? Like, not Imago, but there are tools out there that give you scripts or the yes ands or the whatever. Like, what would be a really great tool here?
Just like some key takeaways are, first of all, it's kind of like any new practice. If you're not used to really speaking up and confronting, it's an art form. You might be awkward at first. It's okay. Let yourself not be good at it. You can get good at it. And it's about just starting, because this is how we deepen intimacy and connection and all of it. So some easy things are to, one, make sure you are regulated. So when you are confronting, it's really hard because we're angry, and a lot of times we have a right to be, but it's different to go, I'm angry, but I'm not currently in my fight or flight response. So I've taken some space, I've grounded, I've regulated, I'm still angry, but I'm not in that space where I feel so unsafe that I'm going to rip your head off and be out of my integrity. Rule number one. So like, even like with my partner, if I'm like, okay, if I'm at a 6 or above, I'm not talking because I don't want to say anything I regret. And if I'm in a fight or flight response, nothing good is going to happen to it. So I have to pull myself out. I have to regulate. And then I come back in. When I am regulated, I'm still angry, but I'm regulated. And then I can communicate out of there. I've not always been perfect at this too, by the way, but this is something that I've really tried to work on. The other thing is to communicate in I statements rather than you. That immediately puts that other person in their fight or flight response. So it's really disarming when you say, I felt this way. Or another way you can say it is, if you see a pattern, if they're doing something, you say, the story I'm telling myself is, you never do the dishes and I do everything and It's like, the story I tell myself is, that you don't care about blah, blah, blah. So you're not accusing them. And so these are just small little nuanced things that can help put somebody in more of their regulated space versus I'm going to attack.
Yeah, the other one from nonviolent communication is like observing the situation without judgment, saying like, you did this, or this is when blah, blah, blah happened. It immediately puts someone so defensive because they're like, wait, they're coming at me. Like maybe the other person didn't even interpret the events that way. You have two different stories there at play. So it's like, hey, when this observable fact happened, when the dishes weren't put in the sink, I felt that blah, blah, blah. And for nonviolent communication, you observe, you name your feeling, how that action made you feel, what you need going forward, and then the request. So next time, can we blah, 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 this is what we need from that dynamic.
Right. It's assuming the best in the again, this is if the person's not abusive. It's assuming the best in the person and leaving space for curiosity.
I think that's so helpful.
Agreed.
And I love how you said the grounding. I know this person really wants to communicate those boundaries with ease and grace. Just have a little check-in ritual with yourself, especially if this is like a big boundary that you've been trying to set for a long time and have been fearful of doing it. You've done all the reprogramming work on it. You're like, okay, I'm ready. I've taken the action, but I just haven't said it, and that feels in integrity. Have a little moment with yourself where you're like, okay, my intention is to communicate this with love, with ease, with grace. I wish them well, but I just want them to know, just have a moment with yourself of your intention for the conversation, because I think sometimes that can prime you into sharing it from a compassionate place. And I guess the other thing I want to like really, for anyone who is codependent or feels responsible for other people's emotional state, the reaction, you don't want someone else to feel rejection in any way, shape, or form. You need to protect yourself first and foremost. You are worthy of being protected. You are worthy of putting your needs first. That is so important. It's really admirable. You don't want to hurt anyone else's feelings, but you can set a boundary without hurting them.
Yeah. And for anybody who's listening and they're like, God, I hear this word regulated. What does it mean? Obviously, we talk about it a lot on the podcast. But again, we have a really great challenge coming mid-year where we're really going to focus on that. So stay tuned.
All about the nervous system work.
I know.
Well, thank you both so much. This is so helpful. I feel like this is one that people are going to come back to many times as they're navigating those tricky dynamics. And I love this word of integrity. Your authentic self-integrity. How can you take care of yourself while in these different relationships?
And knowing that your true authentic self and integrity is going to be integrated. So if it's feeling reactive, fight or flight, rigid, you're working towards it, but you're not quite there, and that goes back to our archetypes, which we can link below, address kind of all of those just to have more perspective of which one you might be falling into, and just continuing on the journey as you integrate to come to that regulated integrity place when you're handling things. Not that when you are there, it's all going to be perfect, but it's not as reactive. That's like energetically something I know when you're getting close to your true authentic self.
Thank you guys. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode as much as we did. I feel like this is going to be a great resource going forward. And I just wanted to share some summarized tips at the end to help you synthesize and integrate everything you learned here today. So the first thing I want to mention is our relationships impact our manifestation process because setting boundaries in those relationships is an act of high self-worth. Honoring your needs in relationships is an act of high self-worth, even the relationships with yourself. Communicating with authenticity and integrity is an act of high self-worth. All of that connects back to your manifestations. So understanding how we're showing up in relationships really impacts how we are showing up with our manifestations. Okay, so now for the checklist. How do we know if we need a breakup or a breakthrough? First, go through the test checklist. Does this relationship impede on a boundary that you have set for yourself? Do you feel shame or embarrassment about this relationship or this dynamic? Do you feel like you are settling or playing small in this relationship dynamic? Do you feel like this relationship dynamic is supporting your growth? Is this person supporting who you want to be at your highest self? Is this relationship dynamic pressing on an insecurity, a core wound, a shadow you're needing to work on, perhaps a dynamic you're working on shifting? If you showed up one way in the past, is it now mirroring that same dynamic again? Is this person an expander for you? And is this person taking up the space of where your manifestation could be? This happens a lot in codependent relationships where one person is requiring constant attention, or even maybe there's a lot of drama in the dynamic. And so there's so much mental bandwidth thinking, ruminating, easing the mind of the other person that it actually is taking up the energetic space of their manifestation. Now, here's the kicker when it comes to the breakup or breakthrough. Have you intentionally gotten clear about what you want from this relationship dynamic? And have you communicated it with that person, allowing them the grace and the space to try to meet you there? Now, I know relationships are nuanced and there are some dynamics where that just isn't possible. And in those cases, if you feel like so much of that checklist felt in not a great spot, then that might be a sign that you need some space or to set a boundary or even to break it off. But if you can have that conversation with a person, if you can be open and honest, step through that fear and be vulnerable with them, This is where the breakthrough can happen. If we're not clear what we even want from someone, but we're harboring resentment for them, us getting clear on what we need and what we want and why is our first step. Then communicating that in a conscious way. We gave a lot of tools in the episode, like the Imago technique, nonviolent communication, in order to not bring up defensiveness from them and allow them grace to try to meet you there. After you have that conversation, if they continually cross the boundary, if it doesn't look like they are on a path to growing your relationship dynamic or evolving your relationship dynamic, then there is your answer for the breakup. Now, I do want to make the disclaimer that all of this is not including the idea of abuse. If there's any abuse happening at any level, then you have full licensing to just set that boundary and take that space and have that break off. And I know that can be really, really challenging. I don't want to minimize that experience because that is really hard to do as well. But I do want to mention that you don't have to go through all of the steps of this process if the relationship is abusive in any way. You deserve to be in a healthy, secure relationship. Friendship, romantic, family, whatever it may be. Okay, so I think this is going to give you guys a lot to think about, a lot to dissect. Look at your even 5 closest relationships in your life, whether they're romantic, family, friendship, one with yourself, etc. And how does that relationship feel to you? Take a little relationship inventory and see what shakes out on the other side, because I guarantee it is going to impact your manifestation, your high sense of self-worth, and your magnetism. Okay, guys, happy manifesting.